look at some scientific ways to show the Earth cannot be billions of years old. In 1999, this article came out in the newspaper announcing that the world's population had crossed over the 6 billion mark. If you don't know how much a billion is, don't worry about it, because Congress has no idea either. But in 1985, there were 5 billion people on planet Earth. In 1800, there was only 1 billion people here. Almost all textbooks agree, and almost all people who study this agree, there were around 1 billion people around 1800. It's just simple scientific fact. And everybody agrees the population is growing rapidly. Nobody argues with that. But the world is not overcrowded. Don't fall for that overcrowded propaganda going around the schools. The world's not overcrowded. The whole world's population today would fit inside Jacksonville, Florida, twice. That one city has 25 billion square feet. The world's not overcrowded. Have you driven across Nebraska? Or Kansas, or Wyoming, or Montana, or drive across Wisconsin? Folks, the world's not overcrowded. You got to fly out west like I do all the time. And it's not, look out the window, it's not overcrowded. Hey, if it's overcrowded where you are, move. Because lots of places are not overcrowded, okay? Figure it out. Not overcrowded, come on. But back when Jesus was here, there was about 1/4 billion people on planet Earth. 250 million. It sure looks like from the population growth curve that the whole population today started about 4,400 years ago. Well, that's interesting. The Bible teaches God made everything about 6,000 years ago. 4,400 years ago, there was a big flood. 8 people survived, Noah's family. If you start with a population of 8 people, having kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, you can get yourself a population of 5 or 6 billion in a few thousand years. Now, if you believe in evolution, you got a problem. Because you think man's been here for 3 million years. Wow. In 3 million years, the population would have grown. Right now, there would be 150,000 people per square inch. That would be crowded. No, man's not been here for no 3 million years. God told Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Have lots of kids. Fill it up. Have a big family. But Satan wants to destroy God's plan. God formed the world to be inhabited, he told us in Isaiah 45. That's why he did it, inhabited. But we got folks like Jacques Cousteau who said we need to reduce the population of the earth. He said we need to eliminate 350,000 people a day to save Mother Earth. Ted Turner said we need a 95% decline in population levels. Okay, Ted, you first. There are some folks who would like to reduce the population to 500 million as soon as possible. They've got their grandiose plans toward a new world order with them in charge and all of us gone or slaves. But the idea is to have 500 million people. See, the Lord told the devil in the Garden of Eden, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust all your life. And then he said, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head. Satan knows some seed of the woman's going to bruise his head. And so he's been trying desperately through all of humanity, history, trying to destroy every human being on the planet. He absolutely hates people. Remember when Herod wanted to kill baby Jesus in Bethlehem? What did he do? Slew all the children. Let's just be sure to get the right one. And Satan seems to want to kill all of humanity. And he's putting this idea into the heads of some of his followers that they need to reduce the population of the planet. We could talk for hours about that and get my CSE College Class 101 if you want a whole lot more on the New World Order plans on reducing the population, coming soon. Well, regardless of what happens to the population in the future, the fact is the chart today shows man's only been here about 3,000 or 6,000 years or less. 4,400 would fit fine with the population growth. If you go outside the city of Atlanta, Georgia, to the town of Elberton and go north about 7 or 8 miles, you'll see the Georgia Guidestones out in the middle of no place. They mine quite a bit of granite there. The Cherokees called this area the center of the earth. They thought that was the center of the earth right there. Well, a bunch of guys who don't know much said, wow, let's set up big rocks here. And they put these big rocks up there with 12 different languages on them that says the 10 commandments for the New World Order. Commandment number 1 for the New World Order is maintain humanity under 1/2 billion. They think we need to reduce the population of the planet as soon as possible. It's interesting, they ran an article here recently. They said sometime in the past, population of man went through a bottleneck. They said it dropped down to only a few thousand people about 70,000 years ago. Well, I think they're getting close to the truth. I think it dropped down to 8 people about 4,400 years ago. Yeah. The galaxies up there are spinning, but the stars on the outside are going faster than the stars on the inside. The galaxies gradually lose their spiral shape. So the question is, if they're billions of years old, why are they still spiral-shaped? Why are there spiral galaxies? Well, to the Christian creationist, this is no problem. They're not billions of years old. Real simple. Stars are blowing up once in a while. We call it a nova or a supernova. And yet there's only about, seems to happen about every 30 years, kind of as a rough average. When they look through the heavens, though, they find less than 300 supernova rings. That's only a few thousand years worth. Why aren't there millions of them? Some evolutionists say, well, new stars are forming to replace the ones that are blowing up. Well, that's baloney. Nobody's ever seen a star forming. We cover lots more on that on video number 7. The teachers are taught to tell their kids that red stars slowly evolve into white dwarf stars, and it takes billions and billions of years for this to happen. That's what the textbooks teach. Well, it does seem to be true that red stars apparently change to white stars, but it doesn't take billions of years for this to happen. All the ancient astronomers described Sirius as a red star. Everybody said it was red. Study back in history. Sirius was a red star. Today, Sirius is a white dwarf star. We know what happens in less than 2,000 years, yet the textbook says it takes billions of years. Some of the planets are cooling off. You can't just keep cooling off. Pretty soon you're cooled off. I mean, if you came in the room and found a cup of coffee on the table and I said, don't touch the coffee, it's hot. And you said, whose is it? I said, I don't know. It's been sitting there for 400 years. It's kind of hard to believe, don't you think? It's still hot after 400 years. These planets cannot be billions of years old. Jupiter has a moon called Ganymede, but it still has a strong magnetic field indicating a hot inner core. Even the atheists will admit it should have cooled off billions of years ago. Well, it's not billions of years old. Figure it out. Saturn has rings around it, but the rings are slowly moving away from the planet. Saturn's rings are indication that it is not billions of years old. The moon is going around the Earth. How many knew that already? The moon goes around the Earth? Okay. Did you know as the moon goes around, it's gradually getting further away? We're slowly losing the moon. It's only a few inches a year. No big deal. Nothing to worry about. Plus, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. But the moon is getting farther from the Earth every year. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The moon is getting farther from the Earth every year. So that means that it used to be closer. How many can figure this out with no help at all? Okay? Well, if you bring the moon in closer, you start to create a problem because the moon causes the tides. Now, you folks up here in Wisconsin probably don't worry about the tides. But in Pensacola, where I live, you worry about the tides. If you brought the moon in closer, the tides would be higher. There's a law called the inverse square law. If you brought the moon into 1/3 the distance, you take the 1/3, inverse it, and square it, it's 9 times the gravitational pull. If you run all the math on this, you'll find out about 1.2 billion years ago, the moon was whizzing around just above the surface of the Earth. That explains what happened to at least the tall dinosaurs. They got mooned. You can't say it's 4.6 billion years old. I'm sorry, that's just geophysically impossible. Comets are flying around through space, but they're always losing material. That's what makes the tail on a comet. You know, the stuff is blowing off. They only last about 10,000 years. Because you can't just keep losing and losing. You know, pretty soon it's gone. It's kind of like your checkbook. See, if your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall every time. Well, comets are losing material. They last about 10,000 years, and poof, they're gone. I mentioned in a seminar one time that comets indicate the solar system is less than 10,000 years old. And this one atheist went home and devoted an entire website to me, an anti-Hovind website. There are now over 400 anti-Hovind websites. I'm so proud of myself. Hey, the Bible says we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Salt irritates. If you're not irritating somebody, you're not doing it right, folks, okay? I offer to debate all those guys any day with half my brain tied behind my back, just to make it fair. They don't want to do that, though. They all want to get me into an email debate. I say, fellas, I type 12 words a minute with 19 mistakes. I get 1,000 email a week. I'm not about to get into an email debate with anybody. Okay, I can barely got enough time to sleep and eat. It's a busy life around my place. But if you want to debate me publicly, anytime, anywhere, all of you together, if you've got an anti-Hovind website, Put up or shut up. You just pick your spot. I'll take them all on. In Christian love, of course. But this guy on his website said, Hovind, don't you know the reason we have new comets, we have comets still, is because new ones are coming in from the Oort cloud. That's their answer to why we still have comets. He said in the 1950s, a Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort proposed, that means he hoped, he wished, he prayed, that there was a great shell of comets out there putting new ones in all the time. He said this Oort cloud is 50,000 astronomical units away. Well, in case you don't know, an astronomical unit is the distance from the sun to the earth. That is called 1 astronomical unit. It's real hard to see Pluto without an incredibly good telescope, and Pluto is 39.44 astronomical units away. You certainly cannot see a comet that is 50,000 astronomical units away. See, actually, nobody's ever seen the Oort cloud. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. The whole thing is based on a mathematical mistake. There is no Oort cloud. But this scoffer said, if you want to use the comet argument, it's up to you to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Oort cloud and other sources don't exist. Oh, now, slow down a minute, Dave. How do you prove the non-existence of anything? What he's trying to do here is called shifting the burden of proof. The liberals are really good at doing this on us, folks. It's so easy to shift the burden of proof. I'll show you how easy it is. Watch this. Suppose I said, watermelons are blue on the inside until you cut the skin. Prove I'm wrong. If all I have to do is make up a story and you got to prove it's wrong, I can keep you busy the rest of your life, can't I? And if all they got to do is make up a story about an Oort cloud and I got to prove it doesn't exist, I mean, come on, that's not how science works. You got to prove it does exist. What we know is we do have comets. We know they don't last long. We know the Bible says 6,000 years. I don't have a problem with the comets. But he's trying to make it look like I've got a problem with the comets. No, no, Dave, you got the problem with the comets. I don't have a problem at all. They fit fine with my theory. The Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. Evolution theory has the sun and stars coming before the earth. The Bible has the earth coming before the sun and stars. Did you know absolutely everything about the evolution theory is backwards? I have Christians all the time say, don't you think God could have used evolution? I say, well, first, that's not what the Bible says. Second, you got a retarded God who can't do it right first time. He's got to practice. Thirdly, your God's cruel and ruthless, uses suffering, misfits, and death. You got a different God than I do. I'm sorry. Okay, no, God did not use evolution to get us here. We cover a whole lot more on that on video number 7 about the theistic evolution disposition. Everything's backwards. You know, the Bible has the earth before the sun. Evolution has sun before the earth. The Bible has oceans before land. Evolution has land before oceans. We can go on all day about the differences between these two theories. They are not compatible. Don't pretend that they are. They're not. They're incompatible. They're opposites. The psalmist said, when I consider thy heavens. Hey, kids, he says when, not if. You do yourself a favor to shut off that TV once in a while and go out and consider the heavens. Parents, if your kid likes laying in the yard looking at the clouds or looking at the stars, just leave him alone. Unless he's got some homework to do. Maybe that's the reason, you know. But it's good to take time to consider what God has made. The psalmist said, while I was musing, the fire burned. The word muse means to think. Think. English is a very cool language. Did you know a theist is a person who believes in God? If you put the letter A in front of that word, it means the opposite of. So an atheist is a person who does not believe in God. Muse means to think. Amuse means to not think. That's what the word literally means, to not think. They've got entire parks around this country where you can pay money and go do that. Have you ever heard of them before? They're called amusement parks. A place to not think, yes. He said, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon, the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? You know, a person that spends his time considering what God has done is not impressed with what man can do. And some of you parents ought to go home and look in your kid's bedroom, and if what you see plastered all over the wall are pictures of sports heroes, think about it carefully. Your kids are being trained to meditate on what man can do. Whoa, he threw the ball through the hoop. Oh, did you see that? Oh, who's going to care in 1,000 years? Who's going to care in 20 years? Does anybody know who won the Super Bowl 10 years ago? Does anybody care? It doesn't matter. All those grown men out there fighting over that one ball, they can all afford to go buy their own. We get all excited over dumb stuff. Who's going to care in 1,000 years? It's been estimated there's enough stars that everybody on earth can own 2 trillion of them to yourself. Go spend some time looking at them. We could talk a long time about the stars. We'll cover more on that on video number 7, about the stars. How do we see the light, billions of light years away? Yeah, we got a long answer on that in video 7. The Bible says, speak to the earth and it shall teach thee. Did you know the earth is like a big magnet? Now, magnets always lose their strength. The Earth's magnet has lost 6% of its strength in the last 150 years. The magnet is getting weaker, which means it used to be stronger, which means the Earth can't be more than 25,000 years old, because the heat generated from the stronger magnetic field would have destroyed life on Earth. That also means carbon dating doesn't work. We'll cover lots more on carbon dating in question answer time video 7. Here's an example though. The lower leg of a mammoth carbon dated 15,000 years old. The skin was 21,000 years old. Talk about a slow birth. One part of a mammoth was 29,000 years old, another part's 44,000. It just doesn't work, folks. We cover lots more on that on video 7. The textbooks will say, well, yes, the magnetic field's getting weaker because it's part of a pattern of reversals. The magnetic field is reversing. This is pure baloney. The magnetic field of the Earth is not reversing. There are stronger and weaker magnetism areas, but not reversed. Follow video 6 for that, but that's all part of a theory called Pangea. How many have ever heard of Pangea? They'll say, yes, boys and girls, millions of years ago, all the continents used to fit together. Oh, really? They don't tell the kids they shrank Africa nearly 40% to make them fit. They also don't tell them they took out all of Mexico and Central America. Hey, señor, ¿qué pasa? ¿Dónde está Mexico? Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala. They also don't tell them what I think ought to be obvious to a kindergartner. If you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath. People say, hey, Hovind, do you think the continents were ever connected? I say, what are you talking about? They still are. What do you mean, were they? Hello, it's not hollow under the oceans, They're still connected. Yeah, it's just the low places are full of water, that's all. What a dumb theory. We cover more on that on video 6. I think the continents are moving some, no question. Okay, I like Walt Brown's hydroplate theory myself. I think that explains the whole thing. We cover that more on video 6. Okay, Sahara Desert has what's called a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same direction. This creates a problem. The hot air coming off the desert kills the trees next door, and that area becomes desert. And once that soil gets sterilized, it's real hard to bring it back. The process is called desertification. They did quite a study on Sahara because they know it's growing about 4 miles a year today. After studying Sahara for a long time, they said, we think that desert's about 4,000 years old. That's pretty old. But I have a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger desert someplace? Why is the biggest desert in the world less than 4,000 years old? Well, I have a theory about that desert. Now here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. And it's pretty hard to have a desert under a flood. So the desert couldn't start growing until the flood water went down. Psalm 104, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down, the water rushed off. And so I predict, based on the Bible, the biggest desert in the world will be less than 4,400 years old. It is. Wow, maybe the Bible's right. Did you know when they drill into the ground, sometimes they hit oil? The oil often is under incredible pressure, up to 20,000 pounds per square inch. It'll come squirting up out of the ground, poof, like a big zip, 20,000 psi. The guys who studied the rocks on top of the oil say the pressure of the oil is greater than the weight of overbearing rock, which really creates a problem. It should have cracked the rock in less than 10,000 years. Okay, well then I have a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why is the oil pressure down there still? And where'd the oil come from anyway? Well, nearly all scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are squished. They're changed by heat and pressure into oil. Years ago, they learned how to make a barrel of oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory from a ton of garbage. They learned that 30 years ago. In Australia, they're taking sewage sludge and changing it to oil in 30 minutes. Sinclair has the dinosaur as their logo. They say the dinosaurs turned to oil. Yes, boys and girls, it mellowed for 80 million years. I don't think so. I have a theory about the oil. Now, here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Now, in that flood, lots of critters and people drowned. They got buried by the gravel and the rocks and the mud and the sand. It got pretty heavy on top, and it squished them into oil. So the oil's down there from the people and animals that drowned in the flood. Which means, if you stop and think about that, you drove over here today on some of your ancestors. Next time you're at the gas station pumping them in there, you can say, bye, Grandpa. You should have listened to Noah. He told you it was going to rain. It did too, didn't it? I was preaching in Denver one time, and some guys came to the meeting, and they said, now, Hovind, we know you teach the earth is millions, or is 6,000 years old. We'd like to prove to you you're wrong. Come with us, please. They took me to the Denver National Ice Core Laboratory. They've got this freezer, huge freezer, about the size of this auditorium. We walked in there, 36 below zero. I got Florida blood, folks. That was cold. I know for you that's summertime, 36 below. For you Wisconsinites. But, we walked in there, and they said, Mr. Hovind, we go to the South Pole and to Greenland, and we drill holes through the ice. And we save the middle part of the hole. Has to be a government job, you know. And saving ice holes, yeah. We can drill these holes down in the ground, and we save the core sample in this freezer. We would like you to see these core samples. I said, oh, that'd be very interesting. I walked in the freezer. They showed me these core samples, and they said, Hovind, you see these rings on here? I said, yep, I see them. You can see them very clearly. They said, what happens in the summer, the snow melts a little bit, and then it refreezes and makes clear ice. But in the winter, the snow packs, and it traps the air bubbles, and it makes white ice. So these rings, clear, it shows up dark here, you know, dark, light, represent summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. They said, now the deepest hole we ever drilled is 10,000 feet. And you can count the rings, 135,000 of the annual rings. Now, why do you go around teaching people the earth is only 6,000 years old? I said, fellas, aren't you assuming those are annual rings? So they didn't know about the lost squadron, apparently, but some airplanes ran out of gas during World War II. They hit a storm, had turned back. They crash-landed in Greenland. A rich guy from Kentucky got a brilliant idea to go get those airplanes off the ice. How many have ever heard of the lost squadron before? In 1990, they went looking for those airplanes. They found them using ground-penetrating radar because they were 263 feet below the surface since World War II. They found them, used a radar machine, and they located a P-38, and they melted a hole down to get to it. As they melted the hole down, got down deeper and deeper and deeper. Finally, they hit the airplane, melted a big hole, and took the airplane apart and brought the pieces up through the hole, took them all back to Middleborough, Kentucky, and put it together. It finally flew in the fall of 2002, I believe, was the first time it flew again. The P-38 from World War II. I talked to the guy who dug out the airplane. His name is Bob Carden. I said, now, Bob, that airplane was in the ground for 48 years. It was 263 feet down. That's 5.5 feet a year. The deepest hole the guy's ever drilled looking for ice cores is 10,000 feet. You divide that by 5.5, you get 1,800 years. What happened to the 135,000? Now, I know deeper layers get squished. They turn to glacial firn, okay? So really 44, like the Bible says, 4,400 years, that's plenty of time to account for the ice. So I went and met Bob, talked to him. There's his phone number if you don't believe me. I said, Bob, you dug the airplane out, is that right? He said, yes, sir. There was a crew of us, but I was on that crew. I said, Bob, when you melted down to get to the airplane, did you melt through ice rings? He said, oh, yeah, there were many hundreds of them. I said, wait a minute. How do you get hundreds of annual rings in 48 years? Looks to me like there should be 48 of them. He said, oh, no, there were hundreds. See, those aren't annual rings, folks. Those rings represent, they don't represent summer, winter, summer, winter. It represents warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. You can get 5 of those in one day around here, can't you? Yeah. But here's a guy from Scientific American still calling them annual rings. Now, either he's ignorant or he's a liar. I hope he's just ignorant, because ignorance can be fixed. Stupid is forever. By the way, that's the difference. Here's a guy from Alaska wrote me a letter, said, Brother Hovind, I work with the Eskimos up here. He said, I got 15 layers of snow on my car in 8 hours. Not 15 inches, 15 distinct layers of snow. Eskimos have over 40 words for snow. What else is there to talk about? Yeah. The kids are taught in school that each of the layers of the earth is a different age. This is pure baloney. Those layers all formed in the flood in the days of Noah. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, connecting those layers. There's a bunch of pictures on our website, drdino.com. Go there and check out the article about petrified polystrata fossils. It does not take long for things to petrify. Things can petrify quickly. Mount St. Helens blew trees into Spirit Lake. Many are already beginning to petrify in 20 years. Here's a piece of petrified firewood. Here's a petrified dog found inside a tree when they cut it down for firewood in Georgia. They say, wait a minute, don't cut that tree up. There's a dog inside. Petrified, turned to stone. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. Doesn't take millions of years to give birth. Petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. Articles on the table down here called the limestone cowboy. We'll cover lots more on rapid petrification on video number 6. The Mississippi River, I did a debate the other night in Mississippi, so they call it Mississippi. The Mississippi River is depositing sediments at the rate of 80,000 tons every hour. 80,000 tons of mud per hour go down the Mississippi and dump off in New Orleans. That delta is growing larger and larger and larger. Well, they've studied the delta pretty carefully. They say it probably took about 30,000 years to put all that mud out there. Okay, well then I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why isn't the whole Gulf of Mexico full of mud by now? They're going to say, hey, it's 30,000. The Bible says 6,000. That proves the Bible's wrong. Ha, ha, ha. Oh, no, it doesn't. I got a theory about that delta. Here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. As the flood water was running off, about half of that mud washed out in 20 minutes. So it looks like it took 30,000 years. They forgot the flood. A friend of mine from Louisiana said, Brother Hovind, I was working in the oil field before I pastored a church, and he said, I used to go out in the Gulf of Mexico and drill holes looking for oil. He said, we drilled through 14,000 feet of mud and hit trees 60 feet tall. The flood runoff formed most of the erosion out in the Gulf of Mexico. Here's a picture of the oldest tree in the world. The oldest tree in the world is a bristlecone pine. It's 4,300 years old, according to this textbook. Earth's oldest organism. Now, some people say, oh, no, we counted one and it's 4,600 years old. Well, trees do not always produce one ring a year. It's very common for them to produce 2 rings a year. Okay, so tree ring dating is not an exact science. We cover that later on in seminar on the college class 101. Go into much more detail on that. But 4,300 years old, oldest living tree. That's interesting. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why is the oldest tree 4,300 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. Here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Destroyed everything. So the oldest tree ought to be around 4,400 years old. Unless, of course, one floated for a few years, for a few months in the flood and rerouted. That's possible, I suppose. So I don't have a problem with the oldest tree, folks. It fits the Bible theory perfectly. This is a picture of a coral reef. You know, the largest reef in the world is in Australia. It's called the Great Barrier Reef. I had a call from a church in Brisbane. They said, would you like to come preach over here? I said, I need to pray about this. He said, yes. I got to go take my family to Australia. I got to go scuba diving with my daughter at the Great Barrier Reef. It was incredible. During World War II, some of the reef was destroyed by ships and anchors and bombs and stuff like that. So the environmentalist wackos went out there to see how fast it grows back. They watched it grow for 20 years. It was a government project. Based on a 20-year study of the Great Barrier Reef, they said it's less than 4,200 years old. That's interesting. But I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? Why is the biggest reef less than 4,200 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. I bet you know what it is, don't you? You can figure it out. Okay. Here's a picture of Niagara Falls. I was just up there last week, actually, at Niagara Falls. The textbook says, boys and girls, the rocky ledge above Niagara Falls has been eroding for 9,900 years. How do they know that? Well, the water goes over the edge and it breaks off the rocks, and the waterfall is moving backwards. All waterfalls do this, okay? It's eroding backwards. Actually, the museum guide tells us it's eroding backwards 4.7 feet a year. It was until they diverted most of the water for hydroelectric power. Now they can actually shut off the falls if they want, change the water to a new channel. But up until about the 1930s, 4.7 feet a year. Charles Lyell went there in 1841 and said, boy, Niagara Falls is way back there. It obviously used to be up here. Niagara Falls is moving back down that gully. Pretty obvious to anybody. That gully's 7 miles long. Now, Lyell said, It's 10,000 years to erode all that. Later he changed it to 35,000 years. The people who lived there said, Charlie, it erodes a whole lot faster than that. Now Charles Lyell's the guy that wrote this book right here, Principles of Geology. Charles Lyell did not like the Bible at all. He was looking for some way to discredit the Bible. This is the book that destroyed Darwin's faith, by the way. We get into a whole lot more of that on video number 4 about Charles Lyell's book. But he made up these numbers purposely to try to discredit the Bible. He knew, though, that Niagara Falls put a time limit. There was a limit to how long it could have been eroding. It runs over the falls into the gully, 7 miles long. This textbook says it took 7.5 miles. It took 9,900 years to make that. Oh, I don't think it's quite that simple. See, Niagara Falls is right there. It used to be further north. It's eroding south. Well, if the earth is millions of years old, why hasn't it eroded back to Lake Erie by now? Why is Niagara Falls right there? Well, I have a theory about that. Now here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. As the flood water was running off, whoosh, about half of that gully washed out in 20 minutes. Because you had lots more water and soft rock. Hadn't hardened yet, remember, from the flood? It erodes much quicker when it's soft. So it might look like it took 9,900 years. No, they forgot the flood. They also forgot to get their numbers right. It should have been 8,400 had they used the right divider, but oh well. Public school textbook, what do you expect? You know, when it rains, 30% of the water runs into the ocean, bringing with it mineral salts. The oceans are getting saltier every day. Today, they're 3.6% salt. They could have done that in a few thousand years. So the question would be, if the oceans are millions of years old, why aren't they saltier, like the Great Salt Lake, the Dead Sea, Salton Sea? Why only 3.6%? One atheist I debated one time said, Hovind, if you believe that flood, would you please tell me how the freshwater fish survived the flood? I said, well, sir, aren't you assuming the flood was salt water? He said, the ocean is salt water. I said, well, yeah, it is today. But I suspect during the flood it was mostly fresh water. It might have been, you know, tangled up mess a little bit with the flood going on, but I think mostly fresh water. And I think the oceans have gradually become saltier, and some animals have actually adapted to salt water. And today we have freshwater crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles. And they probably had a common ancestor, a crocodile. He said, see, that's evolution. I said, oh, it is not. Going from a freshwater croc to a saltwater croc is a minor change compared to what you believe. So you believe they changed from a rock to a croc. That would be a major change. How many of you have ever gone into a cave and the guide said, don't touch the formations, they take millions of years to form? Sure, they got the same speech at every cave, don't they? Go to Carlsbad. It took 250 million years with tiny drops of water. They say it takes 1,000 years to grow 1 inch. I don't think so. Here are some 50-inch stalactites growing under the Lincoln Memorial. It was built in 1922. There's a bat covered up with flowstone. Didn't even have time to rot. He was preserved by stalagmites, which grow even slower. There's 2-inch stalactites growing off a refrigeration shed in Pensacola, Florida. There's a building in Indiana that was only open for 40 years, and the basement was getting full of flowstone formations in 40 years. This picture shows the inside of a cave that was shut down for 55 years in Australia. It's now full of stalagmites, stalactites, ribbons, columns in 55 years. There's 2 people inside that circle for scale. There's a 13-inch stalactite growing off a pipe, dripping water in a building built 7 years before this picture was taken in Herbert Field near Pensacola, Florida. On the bottom was a stalagmite. They broke it off and gave it to me. 7 years. It's in my museum. In Texas, they built a place for cars to park for the University of Texas in Austin. They had to put a pan up to catch the drips because there's stalagmites growing on people's cars parking underneath them. A guy in Wyoming had a hot spring in his property. He stuck a pipe in it about 100 years ago. Water came out the pipe and ran down the sides. They called it the teepee fountain. And everybody thought, wow, that's cool. He's got a fountain in his yard. Well, as the water ran down the side, some of it evaporated, leaving behind mineral deposits. How many have seen those mineral deposits in your sink before? Okay, the guy died, and they left the pipe sticking in the yard. Here it is, 100 years later. That would take some lime away, wouldn't it? Don't tell me it takes millions of years for these formations to form. It does not. You're confused or you're lying to somebody, because it doesn't. The guy down the road put a pipe in his yard later. It's not quite as big, but still, it's pretty impressive. At the current rate of erosion, the continents are going to erode flat, be gone in 14 million years. We have landslides, mudslides, ground creep, mass wasting, exfoliation, avalanches. Does the ground ever fall up? It's always down, isn't it? Well, then why do they tell us we've got fossils that are 300 times older than that, still above sea level? One atheist said, Hovind, don't you know the crust of the earth is sometimes rising, sometimes sinking? You know, you get volcanoes. Sedimentary rock? Well, no. Well, that's where fossils are found, folks. Sedimentary rock. Think about it. You can drive out west or fly out west and just look out the window of your airplane once in a while. There are erosion patterns all over this planet that are incredibly huge in places where it hardly ever rains. Grand Canyon had to be formed in a matter of a few weeks. We covered that on video 4. It did not form slowly by the Colorado River. There are ripple marks that are a mile apart, huge ripple marks in southern Iraq. Evidence of a massive amount of water moving rapidly. A flood is the best explanation for this. Zagros Mountains. The oldest languages in the world are about 6,000 years old, less than 6,000 years old. But that fits what the Bible says. The Chinese calendar says this is the year 4703. Of course, they might have started with Noah. As far as Noah was concerned, the flood was a one-year cruise. It didn't start his life, you know. Or Shem lived 100 years before the flood. Might have started with Shem. I don't know what they started with, but they think Fuhai is the father of their civilization. Hebrew calendar said this is the year 5763. Question: why are there no historical reliable records back more than 5,000 or 6,000 years old? I wouldn't trust the Egyptian calendar. They stretch all sorts of things in the Egyptian calendar. We covered that video 7, I believe. Folks, the evidence for a young Earth is overwhelming, but the students are never shown this. They're only shown the Earth is billions of years old because they have to have billions of years to fit their theory. And I think there's a long, interesting reason why they're only shown one view. They're afraid the kids might come up with a philosophy like our founding fathers had. You know, belief in creation,